Well, welcome back and welcome to all of you who are joining us for the first time. We're thrilled to have you with us, whether you're joining us online at one of our other Atlanta area locations across the country, around the world. We're thrilled to have you with us today for part 2 of our message series about this epic story that really we've kind of disregarded as a children's story. And last week we were unpacking this story in this series, Under Clear Blue Sky, of the story of Noah and the flood. And just as a disclaimer up front, we spent a lot of time talking about this last week. The question we're wrestling with is not, did it happen? It's a valuable question. It's an important question. There's people who've been debating this for a long time. Did it happen? How did it happen? Was there a global flood, a local flood? What was the extent of the flood? Were there people that lived before and after that weren't on the boat? All those things. And those are worthy questions. It's just not what we're focusing on in this series. In this series, we're asking a different question. The question is not, did it happen, but what does it mean? This is an old story, and it's preserved, and it's brilliant. It's couched in the midst of some brilliant literature. And we've been sort of unpacking that literature because there's a massive difference between understanding what happened and understanding what it means. You know this in life. When you see circumstances and situations, you can talk about what happened, but what makes it really valuable is when you understand what it means. And we spent a lot of time carefully considering the literary context and the structure of this narrative and the author's intentions, trying to put on an ancient Hebrew mindset, because that's who the original audience was and that's who it was written to. One of the things we said is the creation story, the backdrop of the creation story is critical for understanding that. And so we actually went back to the creation story. And in the creation story, we saw in the beginning were the waters. There were the waters that God's Spirit was hovering over. That's what we're told in Genesis 1. And God's Spirit was hovering over the waters. And then what God did was he separated the waters. He separated the waters above from the waters below, and he made dry land in between. And we talked about the fact that in the Genesis account, chapters 1 through 3 are about God separating. He separates the waters from the land, and he separates the sun or the light from the dark. And then he creates. So there's separation in chapters 1 through 3 and expansion in chapter 4 through 6. And as God's separating, the thing that he's describing that he's doing is he's taking chaos, which is what the waters represented in the beginning. It was the Hebrew phrase is tohu vavohu, which means wild and waste. It's this chaotic waters. And he's separating them and he's creating order. It's what he does in creation. And when we get to the end of the creation story at the end of chapter 1, 7 times he looks at all the things that he created and he said it was good. He saw everything and he said it was good, and then he gave it over to the man and his wife. He gave them the opportunity to rule over every living thing. And he gave them this mandate to be fruitful and multiply. And the idea of being fruitful and multiplying was to be fruitful with the good things that God had given them and then to multiply that good in the world. As we get to chapter 6 in Genesis, which is where the flood story is, it opens with this idea that's now being echoed for a 4th time. It's the 4th in a series of stories where, different than God, man saw something. And instead of seeing the goodness God created, they saw something that seemed good to them. In the end, it resulted in evil. They took what they saw that seemed good. God gave what he saw as good to us, and we took what we saw seemed good. It happened in the story of Eve in Genesis chapter 3, with Cain in Genesis chapter 4, in chapter 5 with Lamech, and now it's increasing. The intensifying multiplication of evil, of Ra in the world is happening now in chapter 6. There's these cosmic beings, these celestial beings, and the daughters of man who are operating outside the natural order of God's created, intended order for the world. And what's happening now is that the world, though it's being described, we've spent a lot of time unpacking this last week, is that the world is collapsing back in on itself. And the waters, the flood waters, the chaos is being brought back into the world. And man, because of man's choices, has brought chaos back into the midst of the order that God designed and he created in the world. And this is the difference in the story. This is what we discovered last week, is God's not angry. Maybe that's the version of the story you grew up with. God's not angry and he's not wiping out humanity in his anger. The text tells us that God is grieved. And what's actually happening is he's handing humanity over to its desires. And because of that, catastrophe is inevitable. The chaos is taking over and it's becoming pervasive and it's multiplying in the world. And before the story ever introduces an ark or a flood, it poses this question to us. And the question is, who gets to define what is good? Who gets to define what is good for you? When it comes to the world, the big question that we start with is we see good differently than God. And the question that we kind of zeroed in on more specifically even this last week is who possesses decision rights when it comes to what is good for your life? Today, we're gonna pick up sort of right where we left off last week. And we're gonna pick up in the story at the verse we left off with last week. And we're gonna wrestle with a second question that we're confronted with in this narrative. And we're gonna get to the animals and we're gonna get to the flood, just not yet. We're gonna get to those. But there's so much in this story. And just to remember, God's grieving because of the catastrophe that's inevitable. And then Noah, we're told, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So imagine, this is the author writing to the original audience. And the imagery is that God's looking at all that's happened and he's grieved and his eyes rest on one named Noah, who God favored. He favored him because of who Noah was. And if you're still wrestling with whether God was angry or whether he was grieved, Noah's name means to comfort or to console or to find rest. And so the author's telling us that God found some comfort and was consoled in all that he saw when he saw Noah, because Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, and Noah walked with God. This is echoing also the Genesis account when the man and his wife walked in the cool of the day in the garden with God. And by righteous, we're not being told that Noah was perfect. That's not the idea that the author would have had in mind. Noah did what was right as far as he could tell. He does what is right by God, which is what it means to be in a righteous relationship. When you do right by somebody, you're honoring who they are. And you're honoring who they are in relationship to you. This happens with your boss as an employee. When you honor them and their position and who they are and the authority that they have, you're in right relationship. This happens between parents and kids. When kids honor their parents, they stay in right relationship with them. This happens with teammates. This happens with local authorities and law enforcement. To stay in right relationship, to have a righteous relationship, is to do right by somebody. And Noah's doing right by God. So God decides to give Noah instructions for how to prepare for what's coming. There's a catastrophe coming. And God gives Noah instructions so that he can prepare. And this is what he says: make yourself an ark. And it's not what you think. I'm so excited about today. I've been waiting for this moment. Some of you know I like to draw. We're gonna draw an ark, but not yet. We have to talk about this word ark. It's an interesting word. It's actually not even a Hebrew word. You're thinking, well, why is it in the Hebrew Bible? This word was a borrowed Egyptian word. It's the word tabah. And it's sort of been given some Hebrew linguistics to it, but it's an Egyptian word, this word tabah. And the word actually, it doesn't mean boat, believe it or not. Actually, the boat, if you were to, or the word tabah, if you were to translate it literally, it means chest or box or coffin. This is what the word means. And the Hebrew writer, he could have used the word onia. Onia means ship. That's a word that's used in the Old Testament. It was used in the story of Jonah. The ancient Hebrew word for ship or boat is onia, and he doesn't use that word. He conjures up the idea of this treasure chest is the idea. And this is different than the Ark of the Covenant. Different word for ark there, but there is a relationship you'll see in a minute, and we'll talk about later. But this word, it was found in a lot of ancient Egyptian writings. In fact, these tabas, they were found in all of the Egyptian temples. And this is wild because, in the Egyptian temples, there were these boxes. And what they contained in these boxes is they contained images of gods. That's what was in these Egyptian boxes. They were sort of idols, or these were sort of sacred shrine boxes. And this word tabah, it only appears 2 times in the entire Old Testament scriptures. And it appears in this story of Noah, and it appears in one other story. Does anybody know the story? Oh, this is so good. It's the story of Moses. The basket that God instructs his mother to make to preserve his life. In the story of Moses, that basket, you'll see in a second, very similar instructions, is the only other place that this exists. And here's the point. The author wants us to think preservation. That's the idea, that there's something valuable that needs to be preserved. And this word was intentionally chosen so that different than any other Hebrew word. In fact, this was not a word that they would have used. They would have been familiar, but they would not have used this word. He used this word so that they would think preservation. He says, make an ark and make it of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. I want you to remember that. Cover it inside and out with pitch. It's the same instructions Moses' mother was given. Make the basket, make this ark to preserve Moses' life. There's chaos, there's danger. The Pharaoh is killing all the firstborn babies so that he can preserve his kingdom. He can protect his kingdom. And God says to Moses' mother, construct this ark, this basket, and cover it with pitch inside and out. Same language, same idea, same instructions. And he says, this is how you are to make it. So construct this thing and cover it inside and out. And this is the size. So we have very specific instructions. The length of the ark is 300 cubits. Its breadth 50 cubits. And its height 30 cubits. Now a cubit's about 1.5 feet. So the length of the ark is about 450 feet, which is about a football field and a half. And its width is only about half of the width of a football field, about 75 feet. And its height is about 45 feet, or about the size of a 3-story building. So this is a very interesting structure. And it's not what was taught to you. As a matter of fact, if I take the literal directions and I draw what is described by the author of Genesis, this is what we get. If we draw something long and maybe it should have even been a little bit longer, but some of you are like, that's the oddest looking thing I've ever seen. It doesn't look like any ark I've ever seen. It looks like a big banker's box is what it looks like. And that was the idea. He said, I want you to create a big box. Dr. Michael Morales, who has done a lot of work on the Genesis story and the first 5 books of the Bible. He's a brilliant academic and scholar when it comes to the Old Testament. He says this. He says, while popular depictions of the ark often mislead one into viewing it as a boat. We okay? The ark is not a boat. The vessel, having no sails, no rudder, no oarsman, was not a boat. And Noah was no captain steering his own fate. The instructions to build the ark in Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 through 17, utilize 3 times as many verses than for the flood itself, demonstrating the emphasis on the ark itself as a means of deliverance. It's a means of preservation. They're not sailing anyway where they're not on a trip to go to some destination. This is about deliverance and it's about preservation. When the author uses the word tabah and describes the shape of the box, they would have thought preservation of life. And not only that, he goes on to say that the further description of the ark was symbolic of the temple. Look at this. Not only the word tabah that would give hints of a temple. He says, make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above and set a door on the side of the ark and make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, this is important. This is fun. I'm using some artistic liberties at this point. But according to the artist, which is me, this is what I imagine. This is what I imagine we're talking about. This is sort of what it looks like. And there's this roof that gets put on the ark, and then probably my guess is because there needed to be some vents at the top. He says only a cubit above. That's probably a little more in my drawing than a foot and a half above, but probably for some vents. And then I'm not going to draw the door on the side because we're actually going to blow a gigantic hole in the side of the ark. And if we were to like carve open or dig a big hole in the side of the ark, one of the things we'd realize is that there's three, as it's described. What Noah was instructed to build was 3 decks within the ark. So there was the lower deck, which would have been down here at the bottom, then a second deck here in the middle, and then there was a third deck on top, a lower, a middle, or a second, as it says in the passage, a lower, a second, and a third deck. So this is somewhat maybe what was constructed inside the ark. And so this is actually probably, and again, just my interpretation, but based on the information that we're given and the information that as I've studied and learned about these ancient tabahs, this is the image that would have come to mind. This is what they would have looked like. They would have thought of a box with a roof on it. And these ancient temples, the reason why Michael Morales says it was images of a temple is because all the ancient temples had 3 levels to them. And all those ancient Egyptian temples, they had levels of heaven, earth, and the waters below. That's what it symbolized. And you got to remember, the people who are reading this for the first time, and again, some of you that are new to church, you're like, this are new to the Bible. These are people who've just come out of Egypt. Maybe you've heard of the Exodus. They were enslaved. They were pulled out of Egypt, and the Genesis writer is writing to them about their God and their history that they have no idea about because they've been enslaved for 40 years. Many of the next generation, they don't know any of this. And so because of their slavery, he's reintroducing them. And he's using language, the Egyptian language, tabah. He's using this imagery to help them understand the story and how it connects. And the creation story, by the way, just a few pages back, this would have been more echoes of Eden, because Eden was sort of like a sacred temple area. That's how they would have understood it. And again, we have to remember, we're parachuting in on a story in Genesis chapter 6, the flood story with Noah. But this is part of a bigger narrative. I mean, there's only 5 chapters before this. This is part of the story. This is part of the flow of the book. And when they heard this in these 3 levels, they would have realized that there's symbolism of the garden. And the truth is when we're told in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and 3 that when God constructed the world, he constructed Eden. And then in the east of Eden, he created a garden for the man and his wife to live in. And then in the middle of the garden, he constructed something, and he gave them 2 specific trees in the middle of the garden. Some of you remember this. And they were the trees of life, the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We talked a little bit about that last week. The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge, where they got in trouble, the knowledge of Tov and Ra. And this would have been one of the images, the three layers. It's why the language was written the way the literary structure is the way it is in Genesis. And there's echoes of this here. Now, fast forward, because this comes later. We don't have the benefit. We're not going to go this far in the story. But if we kept reading, these people that have come out of Egypt, they're now in the wilderness. And God is having them construct a temple or a tabernacle. It's a structure that they can construct and then tear down when they move to a new place. And this is where they meet with God. Some of you have heard of the tabernacle. And in the wilderness, they constructed this tabernacle. And if you've ever seen a drawing or the way that the tabernacle was constructed, is it looks something like this. And this outer line represents an outer courts to the temple. Or to the tabernacle. I keep saying the temple because the temple was constructed similarly and followed almost the same design later when Solomon's temple was given. But there was this outer courts that you first entered into where you did some ceremonial cleansing. Only certain people could go in the inner courts, but people could go in the outer courts to make sacrifices. And then there was the holy place. This was inside the tent. There was a holy place inside the tent. And then, I don't have room to write this, but some of you have heard of this, the Holy of Holies. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was. And so you're beginning to see these three levels and Eden and the design of the tabernacle. They had a similar layout. Again, the temple that came later was Solomon. And it's because the ark, and this is a made up term, so just go with me for a second. We're getting to something that actually has something to do with you, I promise. The ark is a symbolic Eden temple, if you will. It reflects ancient sacred spaces. God's saying, I want you to construct a sacred space in this ark. And it's significant. These sacred spaces were significant because this is where the preservation of life happened. This is where they ate of the tree of life in the middle of the garden. And this is where they communed with God. This is where they walked with God in the cool of the day. This is where in the Holy of Holies, they met with God. God gave instructions for the preservation of the people of God. This is where the high priest would commune and he would relate with God. Some of you are thinking, okay, that's all so interesting. I don't know if all that's true or not, but I'll take your word for it. So what? So what? I'm so glad you asked. It's a great question. You should pat yourself on the back for asking the question, so what? Here's what the Apostle Paul wrote, because this has to do with you. On the other side of Jesus, he gave his life so that you could have life. And then he placed his life inside of you. And the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 6, he says, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? Just give me a little attitude for a second. It's always dangerous when you draw people, so I'm gonna draw a circle. This is you. And the truth is your body is a temple. It's like a tabernacle. It's like the garden. It's a sacred space. And God has placed his spirit, his presence inside of you. He's chosen to commune with you and preserve your life by leading and guiding you. 1 Thessalonians 5, this is still the Apostle Paul. He says, may the God of peace make you holy in every way, meaning align your life to God's life. It's sort of the same idea of right relationship in every way. And may your whole spirit and your soul and body be kept blameless until our Lord Jesus Christ comes. Here's the image. You're complicated, by the way. Did you know that? Your spouse probably told you that, or your ex-spouse or ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. You're complicated. You are. And the Bible even confirms it. It says you're complicated. You have three parts. You have a body, you have a soul, and you have a spirit. And they're different. They're different parts of you. There's not three of you. There's just three parts of who you are. And your body is the physical part of you. It's the part everybody sees. It's not just the physical part when people see when they look at you. It's the activity of your life. It's what you do. It's your actions. It's how you live your life. It's what people see. That's the physical part of you, your body. Then there's your soul. And your soul is your mind and your will and your emotions. It's your own individual consciousness. It's what makes you unique. It's what people experience because what's happening on the inside of you always finds its way outside. Your mind and your will and your emotions, it controls the physicality of your life. We know that even through neuroscience. And then there's your spirit. And this is what the scriptures teach, is that your spirit was given to you by God. It's an immaterial life force that brought you to life in the beginning when God, Genesis chapter 1, breathed life, ruach, into the man and into the woman. That's how they have life. And this is you, your body, your soul, and your spirit. Let me ask you this question. What if this is the point of the story for us? What if we were meant to think about our lives this way? To see our lives as a sacred space like all these other sacred spaces, an ark that, if constructed well, can endure life's storms and keep us from catastrophe. See, here's the second question I think the narrative is asking us before we get to the flood, before we get to the animals. The second question we're confronted with is, whose instructions are constructing our lives? Noah was given very specific instructions. Now, this question is much more invasive than the first question. The question last week, who gets to define what is good for you, is an important question, but it's more general. This is specific. It's who is primarily instructing what you are constructing in your life. You're building something. You're building a career. You're building a life. You're building a family. And you're constructing something. Who is the primary instructor for what you are constructing? Whose instructions are constructing your life? Remember Noah, he was instructed very specifically about how to construct the ark. And part of those instructions was to make sure you didn't just construct it on the outside. It is to say, it's not just about what happens in terms of what people see or behavior modification. This is the whole self. Noah was instructed to fortify the ark, to fortify this sacred space inside and out. So let me ask you, whose instructions are constructing your outer life? Your relational life, your professional life, your financial life? Whose instructions are constructing your inner life, your personal life, your emotional well-being, your mental health, your identity, the way in which you see yourself? Whose instructions are constructing the parts of you that nobody else sees? And whose instructions are constructing your spiritual life, the ways in which you connect with God, your devotion to Him, your communion with God? This is how we connect with God, is by our spirit. His spirit has come into us to commune in a sacred space in you. And He wants to lead and guide you. That's the idea of the spirit of the law. You've heard the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. God gave all sorts of laws. Jesus gave us all sorts of instructions. And the Spirit guides us in that. That's how we commune with God, to transform our inner life and our outer life. Remember, Jesus came as a rabbi. He came to teach us, and he discipled his followers in a certain way of living. In fact, Jesus' first followers were known as followers of the way, because Jesus taught a very specific way to find true life, abundant life, fullness of life. And these followers of the way, they discipled others in the way that Jesus discipled them in, and they instructed them in the way of Jesus. And Jesus' teachings, over and over, He addressed and answered life's most complicated questions. Now, this is important because you need to be thoughtful about who's instructing your life, because whomever or whatever you look to for answers in life, to the most difficult or the most simple questions. Wherever you go to find answers in life is who or what is discipling you. That's what's actually constructing your life, is where you go to find answers. That's the instructions that we get. And here's the problem. Today in the world which we live, we don't want to take the time to unpack all of this stuff and understand all this stuff to figure out the way in which God wants us to go. We just want to go to chat or to Google or to Claude, and it's like, hey, tell me and help me understand. And you may say, well, but I ask it to tell me what the Bible says. Here's what I want you to know. This is dangerous. You do your own research. You can find out why that doesn't work for yourself. These internet tools are not designed to tell you the truth. They're not. They're not. Don't clap yet. I'm gonna make you mad in a second. That's okay. They're designed to keep your attention. And they're winning. They show you what you want to see, and they tell you what you want to hear. They're not concerned with you. To them, your life is not a sacred space, but it is to your Heavenly Father. To the algorithm, you are just simply somebody that the algorithm is designed to keep you engaged and scrolling and chatting and distracted from the instructions that would preserve your life and allow you to walk with God. And if we're honest, most of us don't really need more instructions or direction in life anyway. We've just decided that we want to be the primary instructors of our own lives. And we're following our own instructions, and we're looking to places that will confirm or affirm the things that we want to do in our own life, as opposed to following the instructions of God, because we see things that seem good to us. And we're looking for somebody to give us permission and instructions that we can go do that. And when that's the case, the responsibility for the outcome is on us. It's on those instructions and those instructing us. It's not on God. We want to ask, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow this flood? Why would God send a flood? Let me ask you a question. This question has been asked many times about floods in our world. 2005, Hurricane Katrina. Terrible catastrophe. The flood, when it flooded New Orleans. And many of us think, myself included, we think, how could a good God allow something like that to happen? I don't know what you think about Jordan Peterson, but in his book, 12 Rules for Life, I read something I did not know about this story that reframed the whole idea for me and reframed this whole idea of what God sent or what God caused or what God allowed. And his take on this disaster was sobering. This is what he says. He says that when the hurricane hit New Orleans and the town sank under the waves, was that a natural disaster? That's the question he's asking. It's not that no one knew. The Flood Control Act of 1965, which I did not even know existed. The Flood Control Act of 1965 mandated improvements in the levee system that held back Lake Pontchartrain. There was actually legislation that was passed mandating that this levee system, they knew there were problems, that it would be fixed, because Lake Pontchartrain, if the levee system broke, which is what happened in Katrina, it would flood the whole city of New Orleans, which is below sea level, killing thousands of people. The system was to be completed by 1978. They gave them 13 years. 40 years later, only 60% of the work had been done in 2005. A hurricane is an act of God, but failure to prepare when the necessity for preparation is well known, that's sin. Come on. You avoid catastrophe by constructing your life according to wise instructions. Where are you getting your wisdom from? Who's instructing what you're constructing in your life? This story, these stories, this whole narrative In fact, if you put it all together, if you're reading this whole story, especially from an ancient Hebrew context, these stories are showing us that everything else in the world outside of following the instructions of God is not only unwise, it's sinning. Now, some of you feel judgment by that. It's like, well, I'm sinning. You're pointing your finger and calling me a sinner. Let's leave God out of it for a second. I'm not even forget sinning against God. You're sinning against future you. Because when you operate according to poor instructions, when you follow partial information and people who don't have your best interest at heart, like your God who's grieved when you don't follow his instructions, the storms begin and the flood is coming. An important detail in the story, the outcome, we'll get to this next week, the saving, the rescuing, the preserving, this didn't depend on Noah. God gave, remember God's a giver. God gave Noah a gift, a very specific gift with very specific instructions about how to build the ark. Noah's responsibility was obedience. God's responsibility was the outcomes. And Noah followed the instructions. He was obedient. God was saying, look, if you'll build the ark according to my instructions, things will go well for you. I promise they'll go well for you. And Noah could not have conceived of what his family was going to face. Most scholars agree that Noah had no concept of the flood or of heavy rainfall. He couldn't have. In fact, the author of Hebrews, regarding the story of Noah, he says this. He says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, meaning in the history of the world not yet seen, in holy fear, he built an ark. This things not yet seen was not merely that the floodwaters hadn't started to rise yet, but that Noah was trusting God about a reality that was beyond his own lived experience. Noah had no idea what was coming. And by faith, Noah obeyed instructions and constructed the ark. He constructed a preservation box. What if that's what God is wanting you to realize from this story? You see, Noah acted by faith. Faith is not acting without information. God gives us instructions and directions. He's not asking us to act without information, but faith is acting without confirmation. Confirmation of what's gonna happen and what's gonna come. We don't know the future. You don't have evidence. You don't have proof. Noah had no conception of what was coming. And yet, under clear blue sky, Noah pre-decided he would trust God. Even if God's instructions seemed absurd to him, to his family, to other people, he decided he was gonna follow God's instructions. Now, I've been open about this story. I've told some of you before, many years ago, that one of the greatest storms of my life that I didn't see coming was in 1992. But the rain started in the summer of 1990 when I first heard the words, "Your dad has cancer." The clouds began to form. And after a year plus of surgery and radiation and treatments, the floodwaters came for us. And I remember my dad was at home, and on one particular night, my mom had us all gather around and we prayed for my dad. We did this often and we went to bed, and my dad was struggling. He was up late and he was really wrestling, and we later realized he was fighting for his life. And I remember my mom telling us a story about coming around his bed and sitting with him for a while. And after he struggled and struggled, maybe inspired by the Spirit of God, my mom said to my dad, "Glenn, you have led us and taught us all these years to follow God with our lives. And we're gonna continue to do that. And he will take care of us. We're gonna be okay." And with that, my dad took his last breath. See, some of you see a storm brewing on the horizon. You're not sure what to do. Maybe it's not up to you. Maybe it's one of those unavoidable, inevitable storms life brings our way. Some of you don't. You're standing under clear blue sky. You see no storms. You see no clouds. Everything seems calm and smooth, which in my experience is usually what happens right before there's a storm. Now, I don't wish any of that on you, but here's what you need to know. Jesus warned us that while we're still in this world, we will have trouble. And he also affirmed the story of Noah. He said in the time of Noah, and I'm paraphrasing, people were living without any concern or worry or trouble about what was headed their way. And they operated according to their own will and their own desires. And God gave them over to their desires. And the floodwaters came. And it was a catastrophe. So let me just ask you one more time before we finish. Whose instructions are constructing your life? If you knew a storm was coming or another storm was coming or likely, wouldn't you want to be ready? What could you do today to fortify your life inside and out to withstand a storm? This is where your faith matters, where it matters today for what life might bring someday. Let me pray for you. God, I just ask for your mercy today for somebody who's in the middle of the storm. And they haven't constructed the way you instructed. Or for somebody who sees a storm on the horizon, I ask for your mercy for them too. That in your mercy that you would help them to humble themselves in this moment. Or somebody who doesn't even see the storm that's right around the corner. We need your mercy for that as well. Just in the same way you had mercy on Noah. Make it clear to us. I imagine as we've been sitting here, somebody's thought about something in their inner life or their outer life that's not aligned with your instructions. And eventually it's not going to go well. The floodwaters are going to come. I pray for your mercy, you rescue them from the catastrophe that could happen. I pray that we would all take heed. We would look at Noah and realize that constructing our lives according to your instructions is the best thing we can do to experience the life, to preserve our life, but to experience the type of life you designed. And it is where we walk with you and meet with you. We trust all this in your name. Amen.